welcome to this, the second talk of the term, hopefully. And I hope you're ready to learn about ebooks, because this talk is Ebooks Are Complicated, the talk, or Ebooks Are a Hard Problem, because I am bad at titles. So, first off, who am I? What do I do? Why do I care about this stuff? Well, I'm a third year CS student and have been a member of HackSoc for most of that time. I'm the former academic events officer for HackSoc and the current chair, which is strange because people keep telling me I do too much and keep telling me to stop doing as much. So what I do is far too much, despite everyone's best efforts. And to be fair, not that much of it has anything to do with computers. For example, this is not a computer. Well, if you can tell me why that probably is there, you will earn a point of me, I suppose. So, that's what I do. Why do I care about ebooks? The obvious answer is I read. I read quite a lot, and these days I read mostly ebooks because there's a pandemic on, and most of my books are in another country. But it's not just that. I'm quite involved with fandom, which means that I follow quite a lot of people who care about ebooks and the law surrounding them. This means librarians, this means authors, this means editors, this means literary agents, this means intellectual property lawyers. You end up osmosing a lot, although the lot I end up osmosing is to do with the US, and this made a lot more sense when the talk was trying to be topical about the Internet Archive, but then it stopped being topical and now it's topical again, so that's what you get for trying to do a topical talk. Let's start with the basics. What's an ebook? And because I want to be like the cool kids, I'm just going to go to the OED and see what that says. First definition, an ebook is a handheld electronic device designed to be used for reading and storing digital versions of books, magazines, and other texts. So, an e-reader. And as it points out, it's now rare, which is why we're not using that definition, we're using this one. A book written and distributed in an electronic format for reading on an e-reader or computer screen, especially in later use, one in a format designed specifically for use with an ebook reader, so that it wants us to say an EPUB or MOBI format. Now, this definition, being a very simple definition, is missing a nuance that we do care about. And that is that many ebooks are platform dependent. This means that you don't actually own an ebook most of the time. You license an ebook from your content provider. So as Amazon's terms of service say, hidden far, far further than they should be, Kindle content is licensed, not sold to you by the content provider. What does this mean in practical terms? This means that most ebooks are enforced with DRM, which is mostly a holdover from the music industry. It's supposed to stop piracy. It doesn't really. Some publishers don't use DRM, which we like, and Tor, who we really like, found out that after a year of not using DRM, piracy had not increased. It sucks, and also it doesn't work. And on a personal level, I found that I am a lot more likely to buy multiple copies of DRM-free books just because I will want to use that book in a different format. Okay, so you may have noticed that ebooks are a whole lot cheaper than physical books, and from a normal perspective, this may seem normal. But let's have a closer look at that. Why is publishing so expensive? What goes into the cost of publishing a book? Firstly, you have to pay the author. This seems like the most obvious. This happens in two parts. An advance, which is a sum of money given by the publisher before the book is published to the author, to tide them over, and then royalties. The first part of the royalties goes into paying the advance because it's an advance. It's not just free money because we live in capitalism. And then the royalties are just a portion of the profit made from any book. Next, you have to pay the literary agent if the author has one, which most authors do in traditional publishing. This is usually a cut of the author's earnings. They don't get paid by the author before they find a publisher. They get the advance that the author gets. Paying editors. Now this can be literary editors, but it can also be copy editors and even typesetters, because you find that in any format your book will need typesetting. Paying a cover artist, because we do in fact judge a book by its cover, and that's a good thing. The point of cover art is to give you an idea of what will be inside the book, and also it's nice for cover artists to have a job. Printing costs. Now this is the most obvious of the costs, and probably the one that you all immediately went to, because yes, you have to print. When you have a physical book, it has to be printed, it has to be bound, it has to be transported from wherever you're doing the printing, which is probably not in your country, to wherever you're selling books. Publishing house expenses, because publishing houses are physical spaces where, for example, editors work when they're not working from home. This means that you have to do things like having the lights on, the cleaning has to happen, you have to have secretarial staff, and all of these things need to be paid for, and the people who do these things need to be paid living wages. Distribution. So this is getting the book from wherever it's been stored to the various bookstores and all that stuff. Marketing. Now this is often partially done by the author. A lot of contracts will tell the author that they should do marketing. But you do have marketing that is done by the publishing house. This is things like, for example, changing your social media avatar to be whatever book is coming out this week. Making accessible copies. Now, this is not a thing that traditionally goes into the first cost of publishing. And this means that you get situations where the Braille copy of the Harry Potter novels are about 80 quid. But, in an ideal world, you do take into account how much it will cost to make accessible copies before you publish the book. Because that's how accessibility should work. It shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be, okay, we're already doing this. We should take into account for this. We should budget for this instead of trying to tack it on afterwards and end up making it way more expensive. And finally, profit for the publishing house. Because, again, capitalism, publishing houses are a capitalist institution, they want to make a profit. Now, obviously, the one that goes into print books and nothing else is printing costs. So why is publishing ebooks so expensive? Everything except for printing. And honestly, the one that matters the most here, because again, we're in capitalism, is the publishing house profit. And what profit the publishing houses want to make, and what that looks like, and the effects of that is a lot of what we'll be talking about in this talk, because that's most of what affects everything. So let's do a case study. This is a historic case that happened in 2012, and if you search anything to do with ebooks and the law, you're going to end up here. So, what happened in this case? Apple had a new iPad coming out, and they wanted this sort of iTunes-like ebook store. And because Amazon had a monopoly at the time, they thought, okay, well, we're going to let the publishers set the prices for the books, which was not something that used to happen. This used to be a retailer thing, but they wanted 30% of the profits. Which, again, is different to the way Amazon was doing it, and Amazon effectively had a monopoly on the sale of ebooks and e-readers, according to HarperCollins, and they were selling products below cost in an effort to exclude competitors. And so publishers preferred Apple's system because they thought that Kindle books being so cheap devalued the idea of how much a book should cost, and therefore people would go into buying ebooks and wouldn't be willing to pay the full cost of how much a book takes to make, which we saw how much work goes into making a book. Arguably they had a point, but they decided to stop distributing on Amazon and prioritise Apple, and unless Amazon went with the same prices, and it turns out that that's price fixing. So essentially, Court of Justice got involved. The US decided that in fact you needed to let the retailer set the price, and also it did not make Apple the most popular company in the world because people did think that $16.99 was way too expensive for an ebook. And why does this case matter to us? Well, it shows us quite a lot of things on just the esoteric bits of publishing. Why are ebooks so weird? And it kind of just shows us themes that we're going to end up seeing a lot throughout this talk. So for example, publishers are afraid that ebooks devalues the idea of owning a book. Publishers are just terrified that the sale of ebooks means that people are going to stop buying physical books, despite the fact that this isn't really backed up by any data. But it is a fear that they have, and it is a fear that they act in accordance with. And so yeah, they act accordingly to that. They will go to great lengths to protect what they believe is the perceived value of books, even if that's not really making them an actual profit. And also, just a slight note, Amazon has a monopoly on ebooks, and this is not great. This case was actually the first time that Amazon's monopoly was really addressed about this, and while the publishers weren't able to fight Amazon and win, and one of the big six even went bust because of this. Nowadays, ebook prices are set by the publisher, but this was a pretty historic moment. So, now we're going to see what effects this case has actually had, and the reasons behind this case has had. Because how do libraries work with ebooks? In the US, ebooks cost libraries on average between $40 and $60. Now, this is a whole lot more than physical books cost, which cost on average about $25. And again, you don't actually purchase ebooks. Ebooks are a service, not a product. And so libraries can purchase an ebook license. This means that it will either last a set amount of time, between 1 or 2 years, or a certain number of checkouts. And again, you can only check out an ebook once per copy. This, like a physical book, this means that waiting lists are quite long. Because each copy is so expensive, libraries will often not buy multiple copies, making the average waiting list about 21 days. And again, this is different in the UK because we're governed by different laws, but again, this talk was meant to be topical, and then it was more generalised, and because of that, I'm focusing on the US. Now, this is really weird, isn't it? Why is this the case? This does not seem to make sense. And essentially, this is publishing houses trying to imitate the way that physical books work. So the clear and obvious one is that you can only get one copy at a time. You can only lend out one copy a single time at a time. But also the whole 26 copies and 1 or 2 years thing imitates this practice called weeding. Now, weeding is a practice where librarians will get rid of the books they have in a library for a various number of reasons. This can be the physical shabbiness of a book. If a book has been checked out enough times, it will just start looking shabby. But it can also be bad content, and this means outdated views, trivial content. It can mean a very repetitive series that has millions of books that have come out and which just isn't as popular anymore. Or it can be a book that has low circulation. And the idea behind this is not only to save libraries' reputation of being up to date and having modern books that serve a community, but also to save space. And this means saving physical shelf space so that you have place for more books, but also saving the patron's time. You don't want the patron to just have to scroll through a catalogue of 1 million books that they're not interested in. And in fact, ebooks are a thing that get weeded because patrons have a limited patience of looking through large collections of irrelevant material. So this is still a thing that needs to happen with ebooks, even though space isn't a limiting factor. But it's just not that good because librarians know how to weed, whether it's ebooks or not. And they don't need this publishing house to tell them, okay, well, you have to weed after a certain point. Libraries know how weeding works. And the only reason this works is because, again, ebooks are a service, not a product. And a lot of what I'm saying is going to come back to that. Ebooks are a service. You buy a license, you don't buy the ebook itself. And honestly, the actual reason for this is that publishing houses don't like it when libraries use ebooks. And that's even weirder. Why? Why don't publishers like that libraries use ebooks? Well, let's think about why publishers like that libraries exist. This is because they reckon that more libraries means more library patrons, and library patrons will become book buyers. This is an idea called cross-selling. If a library patron goes to a library and sees a bunch of books, they're going to see a new book which they maybe won't check out but actually buy. And publishing houses reckon that if you don't have patrons physically going to the library, this is reduced by quite a lot. Now, I'm not sure why, because looking through a virtual catalogue and looking at physical shelves is pretty much the same thing, but okay, maybe they've got a point when it comes to going into sections of the library you wouldn't otherwise, but librarians don't think this is the case. I'm inclined to trust them. And then Macmillan also published a letter in which they claimed that libraries account for 45% of the reads of their new ebooks, but they didn't actually publish where they found this data. And according to a lot of librarians, given the way that ebooks are dealt with in a library, this just doesn't seem very likely. So, is this utter bullshit? Yes, mostly. Just from a common sense standpoint, adding accessibility measures doesn't mean that you increase the number of people who get the original measures. The fact that more library patrons can get books than could have otherwise because they now have access to ebooks and don't need to physically go to the library is not a bad thing. Now, so this isn't necessarily a thing that will decrease library patrons, it will just increase the number of people who can go to the library from elsewhere. And also, the LAA pointed out that it's not a binary of people will get books from a library or people will buy books. For one thing, people will get books and buy books that they found in the library after they've read them. And also, if you can't find a book that you want in the library, your first instinct is not to then go out and buy that book. Your first instinct is to borrow a different book. And yet, this is just a thing that publishers believe, and it has had actual real effects. So let's talk about Tor and Macmillan and the whole library shenanigans. Essentially, in 2018, Tor had this experiment where they decided that they were going to embargo, well, Macmillan decided that Tor were going to embargo ebooks in libraries. What this means in concrete terms is that Macmillan would decrease its price to $30 for a single initial copy of the ebook, but you could only get that single copy during the first 4 months that the ebook came out. After those first 4 months, you could buy more copies of the ebook, but these would be $60 and it would be this 2 years of access fee. Now, supposedly, this experiment increased sales for Tor books, and I've seen the article that claims it does, and while some of the ideas make sense, it just doesn't fully mesh in my mind, and I'm not the only one. This made Tor and Macmillan incredibly unpopular with librarians and library patrons. A lot of people said, okay, well, we're going to put our own embargo on Tor books. We're not going to buy Tor books for another 4 years. But the fact that the experiment happened and was supposedly a success meant that Macmillan announced an embargo for all its books. And libraries did point out that a lot of the issues they're seeing is still because of Amazon. This monopoly that Amazon has is not a new thing. And eventually, because a global pandemic happened, Macmillan dropped the embargo, because it turns out that during a global pandemic, people don't physically go to the library anyway, and people still want books. So, what have we learnt from this massive talk? I hope that the first thing that people remember from this is that ebooks are complicated. Like, they just don't make sense. And the reason that they don't make sense a lot of the time is that capitalism is just bad. A lot of this comes back down to people want to make a profit, and people don't think that things should be free. And yeah, libraries good. Libraries actively fight this idea that everything should be bought and everything needs to make a profit, and yet manage to make sure that authors get paid. Amazon bad, but there is a nuance there, because while Amazon is bad, it does mean that for the first time people can self-publish their books. And this means that you can have more diverse books, because a problem in traditional publishing is that it really isn't that diverse. Even actual black editors will hesitate before acquiring black books just because of the racism that the authors will have to deal with once they are part of this publishing house. They will get vetoed down acquiring black books because the publishing house is already publishing a black author. So the fact that there is an avenue for diverse books to exist is still a really good thing, despite the fact that I hate Amazon. And so, what are my thoughts on the publishing industry? Well, honestly, I don't know. There are a lot of good people working in publishing and making sure that good art gets made and distributed, but again, this is a very specific set of good art. This isn't... All books do not get published because there are inherent problems in the industry. And this is just going to keep happening so long as there are only 5 publishing companies in the US, because they have such a massive effect on the rest of the world. And honestly, I was going to be even more charitable to the publishing industry, but at the time of filming this, I have learned that there is currently an active lawsuit against Internet Archive from 4 of the big 5 publishing companies. And while I very much disagree with the idea of the National Emergency Library for reasons which hopefully have been made clear throughout this talk, the fact that the Internet Archive exists is such a good thing, and the fact that they are now in danger of going bankrupt because the publishing industry can't let go is kind of terrible. Honestly, all I can say is that when you have 5 companies in charge of a whole industry and no one to answer to but themselves and their back pocket, this is the sort of mess that you end up with. These complicated ebooks with weird laws around them, and the fact that for some reason they're a service, except some of them don't come with DRM, so you can put them to different devices, and it's just weird. Sorry. So I've spoken a lot, I've said a bunch of things, and because of that, have a bibliography. It's in tiny font, I know. These slides are available online, so you can check them out later. Here are even more bibliographies. Now, if you're watching this talk live, you can come to HackSoc's Discord and ask me a bunch of questions if you have any. If not, you can find me online on Twitter and on HackSoc Slack at uandatelot. And these slides are on runciman.hacksoc.org/uandatelot/talks/ebooks.pdf. Thank you for listening.